Hi, I'm Eric Wind with Wind Vintage, joined by my colleague Charlie Dunne. We're here for the next episode of Collector Grade. Today we're talking about the Abercrombie & Fitch Seafarer, the colorful, fun watch for all of your sailing and fishing and hunting needs. Abercrombie & Fitch is not something exactly known for watches. To most people, it's not maybe the 20th thing they even think of when you say the name Abercrombie & Fitch. People think of cologne, they think of shirtless models, they think of t-shirts for kids and Europeans, and instead, in the world of watches, Abercrombie & Fitch made some of the coolest watches ever. In fact, they didn't really make them, they retailed them. We have 5 of the nicest seafarers on the planet in front of us, and what makes these interesting for collectors and why we love the Seafarer.
Eric, can you kind of take us through what Abercrombie was back in the day to give context of why these are interesting and have a cult-like following in that regard?
Abercrombie & Fitch started in the 1880s, and they were really a store for outfitting people going out to hunt or to fish primarily.
It was very wealthy people.
Yes, it was kind of called an outfitter in that sense. It was where you could buy your guns, your shotguns, your fishing poles, all of everything you'd need for your safari to Africa. That was the funny thing about New York and kind of luxury back in the day. Whether you're talking, New York, London, etc., you would go to one place to get your jewelry, maybe a Cartier. Then you'd go down the street to maybe Dunne to buy your tobacco, your cigars, pipes, anything else you need. Then you could walk down the street a little bit further and go to Abercrombie & Fitch and buy your guns and fishing poles and everything you would need for your trip.
And eventually watches.
That was everyone was kind of very specialized in what aspect of luxury they tailored to. What's interesting about Abercrombie & Fitch was in the 1940s they began getting watches because people needed kind of sport watches for their hunting expeditions as well. You're not going to see any kind of fancy gold Abercrombie & Fitch watches on bracelets or anything like that. They were really focused on watches for people that were hunting and fishing.
And they were quite big and robust watches is the consistent theme with a lot of these early 40s, 50s watches, which is really fun.
It is. Particularly for that era, you don't really see such oversized watches typically from the 40s.
Anything that was coming out of New York, it was more ornate style or sophisticated chronographs that were in gold generally. So you don't see Breguet numerals, etc. This is a very different style watch that comes out of a New York retailer.
It is, and it remains super niche. They didn't sell a lot of these. They didn't make a lot of these. We're talking maybe several hundred made at most in a kind of 10-year span. Like some of these watches, we know of less than 10 of that Altavia K Seafarer that exist on the planet today. So how many were made? Probably not very many. We'll start with the origin of kind of this whole project. The head of Abercrombie & Fitch was working with a few different retailers, different brands, including Movado, Mito, etc. But he had a good relationship with the Heuer family, and he basically came to Heuer with the challenge of making a watch that could fulfill the solunar theory and help people understand based on high tide and low tide when animals and fish were most active. That was a very tricky thing. No one had ever done that before with a watch. Jack Heuer was 15 years old at the time. He's still alive today. And they were having this conversation at the dinner table with his father about this. And he said, "My math teacher is quite brilliant. We should ask him because he can pretty much do anything." So they basically hired Jack Heuer's math teacher to create the disc that allowed you to calculate high tide and low tide each day and the gearing to accommodate that change in the moon phase every day. So it was pretty incredible. They modified these early examples. They modified a Valjoux 71 to have that, and they also made kind of a less expensive version called the Solunar that just only did the solunar theory.
It's interesting. I've had this conversation with people when they first see Seafarers, and I remember distinctly seeing the first time I saw a Seafarer thinking, oh, that's cool, it's got this fixed kind of tie-dye disc in there, and then realizing that it's rotating and there's a function to it was really quite interesting experience. But people always see that and they're like, what is going on right there? It looks like it's a Saved by the Bell or tie-dye thing. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no brand that was doing colors like this in the 1950s.
Oh, And this example is probably right. They came out with the Seafare around 1949. It's really incredible. It is kind of like a computer for your wrist because you do have a chronograph. You've got basically the ability to do yacht races with the 5-minute increments for a countdown to start a yacht race. And they basically realized with that tidal disc, as they call it, that says high tide and low tide, you could add a moon phase complication by adding a crescent moon, so you could see if it's high tide toward the top or a new moon if it's at the bottom. It's absolutely just a spectacular thing. This particular example is reference 346, so the earliest Seafarer reference. The very, very earliest only showed half of the disc, and then shortly thereafter they exposed the whole disc. But this has kind of a particularly special meaning in your career because I sent you out to the wilds of Idaho to get this watch.
Yeah, I think it was a 4 o'clock in the morning wake up call in the motel that I was in, or a hotel probably. But they were anxious to meet up with me and show me the watch. It was a nice excursion to the state over in a car ride
into Washington.
Yep, we went and got a check for them, and they made sure that the check was good at their bank. They were up and at 'em before I was even awake. But
Charlie was not yet working for Win Vintage full time. He had just completed an internship, and I said, I was trying to buy this watch. You deal with all kinds of different people when you're dealing with kind of original owners or original families of watches.
Which a lot of these watches come from because it's a watch that's in the United States. So you hear people saying, oh, I've got this watch that's an Abercrombie and Fitch, but there's not a lot of information out there. They go to On the Dash and they find out, okay, this is what it is, but who do they sell it to?
And you never know. Some people are kind of trusting in the process and they read about me and they're okay shipping it by FedEx. It was clear in this case, the particular couple who had owned it, it was this gentleman's grandmother's husband's watch. It was kind of a step-grandfather who loved to hunt and fish and taught him to do those things. He had it basically in a drawer for 20 years or something.
Yeah.
And he realized, wait, this is kind of interesting. He started Googling online and then realized it's something valuable. He hadn't been worn since his step-grandfather died like 40 years before. Then it was kind of a bidding war between another dealer and myself privately, and then finally I won. The other guy tapped out, but we had to fly out there to buy it with a check, basically. And up until the last second, he was like, no, I need another $1,000. I need another $1,000.
We thought we were going to walk away.
I was like, I've got the check made out. We can't modify it. Like, this is it. Charlie flew out and had a pretty incredible, crazy experience with this couple.
It was quite a fun experience because it was a watch that I was excited to go out and hunt, but at the same time I don't know if that I'm going to encounter another watch like this and go out and fly across the United States to find it. I'm sure I'll do that for a Rolex or any other watch, but
you recently went to Hawaii. Yeah, not a Seafarer though.
Yeah, I went over to Hawaii for Patek and a Rolex, so
that makes more sense.
Yeah, very plain trip.
But this is it's such a beautiful watch. It's got this kind of darker blue that's got a greenish tone to it.
I remember being excited actually about it. I was like, oh, I got to make sure everything is on point. So looking at the import code on the movement and everything, just seeing everything was coherent.
Yeah, AXF.
It was like 6 o'clock in the morning, checking the loom and making sure everything looked right and the Geiger counter. It was a very fun, memorable morning.
Yeah.
Needed a service. That's the only thing that was the downside of it.
It actually was running.
I don't think it was.
No, it was.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm mistaken. You know what it was? The chronograph function wasn't working.
Oh, yeah. And
that was it.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a really cool watch. Really oversized, large chronograph for the era, though.
Just special.
And it's got a very kind of similar, like, to a lot of Longines. It's a big block of steel, essentially.
It is, yeah. And it's got a workhorse, kind of very loud Valuations 71 movement. Yep. So a short time later, in the early to mid-50s, Abercrombie switched to these Valuations 72 based watches. Now still very, very big watch at 38 millimeters, but it's much thinner. They also switched from this darker greenish blue to a kind of a lighter blue, and you get that kind of almost Tiffany blue in the title register.
Yeah, very greenish teal.
And then you get kind of the gold foil numerals they switched to. These were radium loom. This has a blue loom in the triangle hour markers, and in the minute hand, hour hands, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
Not many companies, if any, were using blue loom. It was something completely unusual that Heuer and Abercrombie and Fitch were doing at that time.
I have to imagine when the people who were on the internet forums in the beginning days of collecting, vintage Heuers, it's like, oh, it's reloomed.
You see,
such a shame.
People still reloom these things, and it's again, when from the collector perspective, you want to see for that reference the 2443, which is actually a 2447 case, and they found some original materials recently saying it was marked as a 2447, so it's kind of confusing. For that early example, you want to see that original blue loom if possible. There was an example that came up at auction a couple years ago, and the loom in the hands was way too blue. It was clear it was reloomed. It was a weird one.
The numeral style on these dials is just incredible. It's, like you were saying, very foil-like. It almost looks like it's like a foil layer on underneath it. Exactly. But it's so interesting. And then in certain lights, it catches your attention. It's a very, very, very cool dial.
It's spectacular. And that is also has this kind of these faceted lugs that you can see how it led to the Carrera when it came out in 1963. It's the same exact reference number, 2447. It just kind of has such an interesting evolution.
Stepped bezel too, which is very fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's got kind of that 1940s case DNA, and it both also 50s and 60s. It's kind of right in that kind of interim period, bridging two worlds. You go from that kind of, as it's sometimes called, 2443 or 2447 to the 2444, which has much more of a kind of soft case. It has bevels, but they're much softer. This is an unpolished example. It's got darker blue loom. This is an early, or as we call first execution, 2444. The second execution looks a lot more like the Seafare 2447 that follows it. So these are distinctive because of the Arabic numerals. It's got a kind of an ocean blue with yellow on the registers. So it's almost like a green, when I think of the Green and Yellow by Lil Wayne and the Green Bay Packers, it's got a little bit of a greenish blue.
Great analogy.
So, and I'm a big Packers fan, being from Wisconsin. Just spectacular watch as well. Those colors are really unusual, specific to that model.
Now, am I mistaken?
Execution.
These are in two different case metals. We've got chrome plated and in stainless steel.
No, for the Seafarers, they were always in all steel.
But there was
Solunars,
which
sometimes that did not have the chronograph complication. They made chrome-plated examples.
And the Seafarer would have been more of an expensive retail price than...
Yeah, much more expensive because of the chronograph complication.
And throughout the first few iterations, we're seeing the functionality remains very, very consistent. They're not going to mess with people's heads in terms of how to get all of the gadgets working. It's a very cool watch, but do you think that, like, in terms of production numbers, how many of these have you seen out about?
I mean, very few. I think we've sold more great Seafarers in our last 8 years with Win Vintage than anyone else. It's not easy to find them. We have somewhat of a competitive advantage because we're in the United States, and somehow the great ones seem to find me, and I seem to find the great ones, but it's very tricky. Occasionally they do come to auction. I'm usually fighting for them there too if they get there. So I just find them to be some of the coolest chronographs ever made. So you go from that 2444 to what many consider the holy grail of Seafarers. In fact, it's a watch a lot of people don't even know exists. There's less than 10 known. That is the 2446 Seafare, not the compressor case, later one, but the early one. It's kind of circa 1963. That 2446 Altavia came out in 1962 and 63, and then it led into the Carrera as well on the Carrera side. But this particular example is found at an estate in Norwalk, Connecticut, basically in a drawer. Almost all of the Seafarers were not really sold on bracelets. Yeah. Bracelets were added by owners or things. I added this bracelet to it. It obviously is a great look.
Yeah, and it complements the Heuer variant of it.
But it's not original, but it fits perfectly the case. This dial has kind of developed such a beautiful golden hue. It's a really big watch as well.
It's got the same case style as your deep sea alarms, as well as, it's a really, really nice case. I mean, is that the
spectacular.
appeal though? Because obviously it's got a really cool dial.
The case,
accents
the
in the
bezel.
blue is perfect. But is it mostly the case that people are excited about with that?
Yeah, I think the case and the bezel and the size. Yeah, it's like a holy grail Seafare in many respects. Then you go into what many people think of when they think of a Seafare in their mind's eye. It's the Carrera Seafare.
Yeah.
It's the Carrera case, 2447 case, but you have it modified so you can adjust the tidal register at 9 o'clock. It's got the very thin hour markers, which you also see on that 2443 and also on the 2444 second execution. This particular example is just super nice condition as well, unpolished case. In fact, all 5 of these watches are unpolished cases, which is not easy to find. So yeah, it's a beautiful example. Again, added the bracelet to it. Typically, these were not sold on bracelet, or they might have been sold on a JB Champion. Jeff Stein has one on a JB Champion.
Is it signed Abercrombie and Fitch?
No,
Oh,
no,
goodness.
just a standard US JB Champion. So they're just spectacular watches, so clean. Love the blue accents on the silver dial.
And this, I would imagine, this is kind of the most exciting for people who want to get a Seafarers because they already have an idea or maybe even own multiple Carreras at this point in their collecting journey.
That's kind of, yeah, that's like in some sense the most liquid, I would say, of the Seafarers. But these are also extremely valuable and liquid. It's just a smaller number of people that know about them and care about them.
And less production on those watches as well.
Of the 5 watches on the table, 4 have radium lume. This is the only one with tritium lume.
Okay.
Some people care a lot about not wanting any additional radiation around them, or I've read little things where they're concerned about the health effects of radium exposure. I think you and I both kind of fall on the side where it's okay to own radium watches. I wouldn't probably wear it 24/7, 365, but
Yeah, as long as they're an Abercrombie and Fitch chronograph. And
and it's a risk worth taking. Some people avoid these earlier ones for that reason, but again, it's probably not something someone would wear every single day. They're like part of a broader collection. It's not a big deal.
Would you say that the majority of people who are excited about Seafarers are people who are already deep in the Heuer collecting journey? Is that something that's kind of consistent with the people who want to buy a Seafarer?
It's an interesting thing because usually people do like Heuer chronographs that like Seafarers, but sometimes it stands alone as like the only kind of watch like this in someone's collection.
Yeah.
It's not about Heuer so much as just the design, the colors, the cases, everything else. The other thing that's worth and important to mention is almost all of these watches, there's also a Heuer Mareograph version of the watch, which was for the international market. We don't see those obviously as much in the United States. Some people prefer the Heuer version. I prefer the Abercrombie and Fitch because I like the arced signature. Abercrombie and Fitch, the Seafarer text almost looks like kind of cable stitched.
Yeah.
That S, the cursive lettering is so kind of 1940s. It reminds me of like a bank bag that someone cable stitched, or like a Letterman sweater, or Letterman jacket, things like that. The kind of old school Americana.
It's interesting, the arced signature of Abercrombie and Fitch. It's as if Abercrombie got the memo that we're done with that from the Swiss watch industry 20 years after everybody else.
Yeah,
because you see that
exactly.
in like 1930s
40s,
wristwatches,
yeah.
but it's kind of over at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And it says Abercrombie and Fitch Co., which I always like the Co. Also, the dials typically say made in Switzerland rather than Swiss, or Swiss made or anything like that. So it was particular for the American market. So cool.
It's interesting in terms of, like, we were talking about where these watches are found. So obviously Abercrombie and Fitch is, from what we understand, entirely a United States retailer as far as where the watches were shipped and purchased. You don't see a lot of these.
They had like 3 main stores, I believe, back in that period. New York on Fifth Avenue, Chicago, and San Francisco. Yeah. Like Ernest Hemingway would go there and buy his rifles before he went on safari.
Roosevelt as well.
Stuff. Yeah, I think almost everybody who was into hunting and fishing would buy their goods there.
So it's interesting, you see a lot of the collections of Abercrombie watches, and Heuer's for that matter, in the United States, because it's harder for people to find those in Italy or in Germany, whereas you see a little bit more of interest in like Longines, for instance, as a European kind of collector community.
Yep, so this is Gallet we find more of in the United States, and Abercrombie and Fitch Seafarers. Those are our kind of competitive advantages as collectors and dealers in the United States, but much harder to find like 13ZN Longines chronographs and things like that for us from original owners. Or Eberhard, no way, you're not going to find that in the United States in terms of original owners.
So of the Abercrombie and Fitch Seafarers, which watch would you personally want to own if you had to choose between any of these 5?
It's very hard. They each have their appeal in terms of colors and things. I mean, of all of them, I think the 346 kind of has my heart the most. I just love that case and the size. And if I was putting on a watch every day to wear, it would probably be the 2447 because I like the bracelet and the Carrera and kind of the lightness of it. So that's, I guess, the question. One of my first vintage watches was actually a 2443.
Really?
As we know, the 2447, very similar to this. The case was more it was polished and but the dial and the colors of these watches are incredible. And the patina, it's actually very hard to find clean Seafarers. They often have a lot of water damage. Like the people that bought these wore these watches.
Yeah, and they're not particularly water resistant cases in the 50s.
Exactly, in 40s. So you see a lot with super distressed dials, incorrect parts because people swap things in and out and didn't know how to fix them. It's hard to find, as I would say, collector grade examples. You can find very charismatic, cool, worn examples as well, and we sell those too. I mean, any Seafarer is a special watch. In terms of finding like top condition Seafarers, it's extremely difficult. So yeah, we should talk through kind of, I think, values, I would say.
Sure.
What's kind of interesting about these is some people would see this and think it's like $1,000 watch or something, but they're insanely desirable and valuable, and people really, really, really want these. So this 346, I would value around $60,000 today. Cool. Just so hard to find them in that condition. 2443, they've sold as high as $55,000 at auction. Similar condition. 2444, this is slightly less desirable because the case isn't as interesting. It's a little bit smaller, but this is still a watch that's sold for about $40,000 at auction. Yeah. This is where it gets crazy. This watch I bought from Sotheby's several years ago for almost $100,000. I was just like, I have to have this, basically. You know, there's the nicest one, in my opinion, of those that are known, of those out there. There was one that was kind of a Frankenstein put together piece because it had a later dial, and like, this is the best, like, all original example with good provenance that I had seen. So, you know, you tell that to someone that's like $100,000 watch and their mind blows up, their head falls off. And then these Carreras have also really moved up over the last decade. They've gone from like $15,000 to $19,000 to over $50,000 for an example like that. So again, over doubled over the last 10 years.
I guess the best comparison to your kind of offerings is, what does a eggshell Carrera go for?
I mean, yeah, it's similar. An eggshell actually has radium and is a little bit earlier. I've sold those as high as $40,000 and as low as like $10,000 to $15,000. This is more liquid, honestly. It's easier to sell. We had 2 last year, including that one, and they both sold in the 50s within like a day or 2. I wish I could find more, honestly. Thank you for joining us for Collector Grade, an episode on the Abercrombie and Fitch Seafare. We hope you'll come back for more. Please let us know if you have any ideas for other references for us to cover and models. We also encourage you to go to winvintage.com. Please sign up for our email newsletter and take a look at our latest listings. Finally, please like, subscribe, and comment on this post. Keep us fired up to do more. Thank you.